Thank you everyone for joining us this evening. Welcome to A Crip Reckoning, Reflections on the ADA at 30, a virtual panel and discussion offered as part of the series Discourses, Interdisciplinary Disability Dialogues, created by the Office of Interdisciplinary Programs and Outreach at the Burton Blatt Institute, housed in the Syracuse University College of Law. We acknowledge with respect the Onondaga Nation, firekeepers of the Haudenosaunee, the indigenous people on whose ancestral lands Syracuse University now stands. I'm Diane Weiner, a research professor and the associate director of our office. I'm a white passing, female presenting, gender nonconforming, neuroqueer. I also identify as a Crip, Jewish, mad, and a pantheist. I'm doing that description for you in the spirit of accessibility. It's an image description of my embodiments and my emotional landscape. I have long salt and pepper hair and green glasses, and I have my camera in this direction, which is vertical in the portrait setting because of my visual impairments. Discourses is an exciting ongoing series on disability literature, media, and the arts, focusing on critical reflection, teaching, and research in today's world. Tonight, we are very honored and pleased to present this virtual panel and discussion featuring 5 distinguished thought leaders and scholar activists in the worlds of disability culture, education, advocacy, and innovation. Our panelists are LaDerek Horn, Naomi Ortiz, David James, DJ Savarese, and Alice Wong. Our esteemed panel moderator is Professor Stephen Kusisto, who is the director of the Office of Interdisciplinary Programs and Outreach and a university professor. I'll introduce our panelists and moderator in a few minutes. Tonight's discussion topics will include ableism, cultural change, equity, creativity, and intersectionality. Zoom webinar participants will have the opportunity to ask questions of and make comments to the panelists during the last 20 to 30 minutes of the virtual gathering. I will describe our Zoom webinar accessibility features shortly. Copies of selected texts will be available for purchase via the Syracuse University bookstore, with thanks to our colleague Karen Spencer. We will provide a link for you in the Zoom chat and also email you if you are registered here, of course, so you'll be able to get discounted copies of our participants' beautiful work. This event was made possible with generous support from University Lectures and the Office of Diversity and Inclusion. Thank you, everyone. Thanks to our American Sign Language interpreters, Marika Larson and Dave Gratzer, and Terry Slater of Empire Interpreting Service. And thanks to our live captioner, Missy from Professional Reporting Services. Special thanks to Rachel Zubel-Ruggieri from our Office of Interdisciplinary Programs and Outreach, and to Kyle James Davis, who's the behind the scenes wizard of this production, and he's from the Syracuse University College of Law's IT services. Some Zoom accessibility specifics follow as we get started with this evening's interactive webinar format. I want to make sure the captioning's all set. Are we good now, Kyle?
It looks like it, but please let me know in the Q&A if that is not the case.
All right. So we have multi-format ways of handling accessibility here, and it looks like we have a question. Someone just joined and missed the announcement about the discount offered to books of the speakers. Could someone please put what that was in the chat? We promise we will. We will also email everyone who's participating. Thank you for asking about that. Kyle will be sharing the link, and the person said, awesome, and you're very welcome. So let's talk a little bit just for a moment so we can get to the heart of the matter about the accessibility facets of this event. If you have any questions about access or any concerns about anything at all at any point, you're welcome to send a private chat message to Rachel Zubel-Ruggieri or to Kyle James Davis. And we're aware that some people might not feel comfortable or be able to comfortably use the chat. We know that Zoom has its ups and downs, we'll say politely. So if you're unable to access the chat feature for whatever reason, you can use the raise hand feature, speaking of disability language, and we will turn on your mic temporarily and your video temporarily, and you can ask your question that way or express whatever concern you may have. American Sign Language interpreters will be on screen the entire time. We will have live captioning the entire time throughout the event. A transcript of the live captioning will also be available throughout the evening. You can enable your subtitles by clicking on the live transcript button. Sometimes, but not always, that's at the bottom of a Zoom window. It depends on the interface you're using. And you select Show Subtitles from the resulting drop-down menu. And if you would prefer to view the full transcript in a side panel next to the meeting window, you can select View Full Transcript from that same menu. Should any visual content be shared, which will happen at least once that I'm aware of, it will be accompanied by an image description. And as I said, during the last 20 to 30 minutes of our event, we will have a discussion. We really want this to be engaging and interesting and participatory and kind of like jazz. If you want to ask a question or make a comment, please use the Q&A feature, which includes the option to remain anonymous, or you can use the chat feature. And a third option, as mentioned, is you could use the raise hand feature. And I name it that wasn't me. And your mic and video will be momentarily turned on so you can ask your question or make your comment. We will do our very, very best to respond to as many people as possible. About 500 people registered for this. I don't know how many people are here, but we're very honored and delighted you're with us. And I will read aloud the questions and comments shared via these different facets of the Zoom interface. And that way, the comments and questions can be made available in the live captioning in the transcript and interpreted into American Sign Language. If your questions and comments are not addressed during our event, we will do our very best to respond to you after the event by reviewing the chat and the Q&A, which will be saved. Or you are welcome to send questions and comments to us at an email address, which Kyle will put in the chat, which is oipo@law.syr.edu, or post them in the discussion section of the Facebook event page associated with our event, which we'll also share with you. If your questions and comments are meant for a specific person or for Professor Kusisto, in other words, a panelist or Professor Kusisto, who's of course a person, please indicate this information in your correspondence with us. And then after the event, we'll do our very best to reach out to registered participants via email with all of these details as well. Multiple communication approaches are clearly happening this evening. Let's all be very mindful of that. Thanks so much. And this Zoom webinar is being recorded. An accessible video will be posted publicly on our website as soon as it's available. And now it is my honor and distinct privilege and pleasure to introduce our panelists and our esteemed moderator. Lederick Horne is a poet, speaker, and advocate who uses his gift for spoken word poetry as the gateway to larger discussions on equal opportunity, pride, self-determination, and hope for people with disabilities. Naomi Ortiz is a writer, poet, facilitator, and visual artist whose work focuses on self-care for activists, disability justice, intersectional organizing, and relationship with place. Pratik Patel is the Director of Information Technology Access for the City University of New York, CUNY, and the owner of EasyFire Enterprises, LLC, which consults on a variety of technology projects on accessibility for people with disabilities. David James DJ Savarese is an author, artful activist, public speaker, and practicing optimist, working to make self-determined lives a reality for non-traditionally speaking people. Alice Wong, she, her, is a disabled activist, media maker, and consultant, and the founder and director of the Disability Visibility Project, an online community dedicated to creating, sharing, and amplifying disability media and culture. And Professor Stephen Kusisto is a university professor, and as I mentioned earlier, the director of our office, the Office of Interdisciplinary Programs and Outreach at the Burton Blatt Institute. Professor Kusisto is a widely published poet and author and a frequent speaker in the United States and abroad. I'm going to turn off my camera and my microphone and get into the chat interface now. And I will be back with you on camera and with the microphone when we get to the Q&A, the discussion at about 9 o'clock. And now please join me in warmly welcoming our distinguished guests and moderator. And thank you again very much for joining us tonight. We are delighted and honored that you're here.
Yay, yay, yay. Can you hear me? Those who hear? All right. I want to applaud Diane Weiner and Rachel Zubel-Ruggieri, who have worked behind the scenes rather tirelessly to make this Zoom community project happen and to make it as accessible and fully inclusive as possible. They've done remarkable work, and I'm so proud to be their unindicted co-conspirator, as they used to say back in the Nixon administration. I am Steve Kusisto, and I am a poet, an essayist, memoirist, journalist, and a bit of a gadabout. I want to describe myself. I am wearing a gray and white Icelandic sweater. I am a 65-year-old, slightly round-faced Finnish American guy, which means I'm rather pink, actually. I'm wearing my favorite dog walking hat, which is a Black Lives Matter baseball cap. And I'm sitting in my basement in front of a painting, which is of a shipwreck, which is not in any way, I think, a marker of how I feel about what we're doing. Some years ago, a wonderful American poet, essayist, and memoirist who was disabled, named Nancy Meyers, who wrote a number of wonderful books, wrote an essay that became really canonical. That is to say, it's now included in every anthology of terrific first-rate American essays. And that essay was called On Being a Cripple. If I'd been a little less lazy, I'd have looked up for tonight's presentation what year she first published that essay. But I want to say sometime around 1990, 91. And so that essay came of age just as the Americans with Disabilities Act was also coming online. Disability, literary, and artistic culture began to really move in accord with the new and dynamic human rights opportunities opened up by the Americans with Disabilities Act, signed into law in 1990. Nancy Meyers, in this wonderful essay, describes how the word handicapped or the word disabled do not describe her. She had multiple sclerosis, and she found that those words were singularly out of focus. But as a scholar of religion, she discovered the word cripple in the Lindisfarne Gospels, which date back to the 11th century. She said, "Cripple described me. As a cripple," she said famously, "I swagger." And she might not have been entirely the first person to adopt the word cripple to describe her own relationship to physical difference, but she certainly became quite well known for that essay. In the years that followed, cripple consciousness has become a singular dynamic of reclaiming disabled lives at the table of culture. Crip life, as we now call it, to crip something, as we say, using the verb version of it, means not only to demand our place at the table, but it means design justice. It means to imagine new and fully accessible and inclusive ways for those who are physically different to be part of the mainstream. Moreover, it means using our imaginations and our advocacy and intelligences to envision better ways of doing things. Just as this event tonight demonstrates how many ways we can engage with a Zoom meeting. Just so, cripping means to not only meet the ADA requirements for accessibility, but it really means to go beyond them. Here at Syracuse University, we have a longstanding graduate student committee called the Beyond Compliance Coordinating Committee. Going beyond compliance means to imagine disability and the needs for accommodations that the disabled experience as part of a generous and visionary, to use a optocentric term, approach to imagining public space. As our population ages here, and in my family's native Finland for that matter, finding new ways to engage with diverse physical populations means everything. So why is a celebration of the ADA at 30 a crip reckoning? And why a reckoning? I think this is because we know that there are miles to go yet in the fight for opportunity, justice, and liberty for those with disabilities. We know that disability is intersectional, that disability means Black people, Latinx people, Indigenous people. It means immigrants. It means migrants. It means the old. It means women. It means people with complex sexual orientation and trans people. A crip reckoning means, in some sense, how can we both celebrate the ADA for what it has done, and how can we use this occasion to talk vigorously and with discernment, with nuance and scruple about what needs to happen now. So those are my opening remarks. And I'm so privileged to be on this stage with such great disability activists and with such an audience. I'm so pleased. Pratik has agreed to go first. And I just want to say that the work that he has done and continues to do in the service of making digital technologies and environments not only inclusive for the disabled, but to push them to be more imaginative, that it's really great work. And we're really lucky to have him here tonight. Pratik, are you there?
I am here.
Yay.
Thank you so much, Stephen, for that introduction and the invitation to be here on this panel with all of the esteemed panelists and with you. Tonight, before I begin in the service of accessibility, let me give you a brief description of me. I'm sitting here in my living space, wearing a white shirt and a dark jacket. I'm Indian American, dark hair, brown eyes, and I am blind. And that description should suffice. And in the service of full accessibility, you'll notice that my video is somewhat dimmed. It's primarily because of lighting, but it works for accessibility as well. So tonight I want to talk about the ADA and how it has mostly failed when it comes to access to technology. 30 years ago, when the ADA was signed, the internet as we know it did not exist. Most people use typewriters, if you can imagine that, or word processors. Or if they had access to the internet, it was a rudimentary version of what we know today. Because of that, the crafters and us as advocates failed to imagine what could be possible. Subsequent to that, lawmakers, regulators, and even many of us failed to see some of the advantages and the disadvantages of technology being such a pervasive part of our lives. And because of that, when it came to looking at accessibility to digital spaces, we were far along in the development of technology and digital technology to realize that we needed to make sure that ADA covered the technologies that were being developed. But because we were late and regulators and government was not far seeing enough, there was an incredible amount of confusion. Practically through the 90s and through the middle of early to mid 2000s, there was no guidance related to accessibility and technology. And when the guidance came, it was sporadic. So the access that we enjoy today had to be done through other means, such as Section 508 of the Rehabilitation Act, especially in the university environments and certain government entities. But because of that, many of the commercial technologies were not accessible. And the access we enjoy today is also it's somewhat sporadic. In the middle 2000s or so, we began to recognize that there were emerging classes of technology that were becoming available where there were some significant gaps. And no matter how lawmakers applied the law to these technologies, the ADA would not cover them. So many of us got together in the mid 2000s and looked at creating other opportunities through law and advocacy to make other technologies, specifically communications, more accessible. So late 2000s, we worked with Congress to pass the 21st Century Video Accessibility, Communications and Video Accessibility Act, or as we call it, CVAA. This brought technology access significantly forward in that it provided access to a whole class of new technologies, including captioning on videos, video description, accessibility to different interfaces such as televisions, as well as advanced technologies such as gaming. This was passed in 2010, and many of its final regulations have come into effect over the past few years. Of course, this means that access to technology is still in its infancy. Even 30 years after the ADA has been passed, and even the advances that we've seen in technology, the access we see has been granted to us by courts, in some cases successfully, in some cases not so successfully. The definitive word of this came last year when finally the Supreme Court rejected the appeal that Domino's made in its lawsuit, where Domino's claimed that it did not have to comply with ADA. And the Supreme Court rejected its appeal. So finally, we have a definitive version of what we think is final on this. What we can use, however, is guidance from our regulators, specifically the Department of Justice. We can see there are opportunities that the Department of Justice can use to enhance what is now a blank slate. Even though those of us who work with companies or different entities say there are these guidelines, if there are no technical guidance, if there is no technical guidance, we will find that we face a bigger challenge in that companies will interpret what is allowed and what is not allowed. In addition to that, there are other technologies that are coming online because of the pandemic, because of different technologies being developed that will not necessarily be covered. And we must look to ensure that those are covered either through guidance, through advocacy, or through other laws as we may need to pass. ADA, of course, is not perfect. We know that. And from time to time, we will need to work hard to either pass additional laws or to have ADA amended to have technologies included. I want to specifically talk about workplace environments. Because of the pandemic, the trend toward remote work is accelerating. It's a trend that has been going on for some time. Those of us who have worked remotely and worked with companies have advocated for disabled people to be included in remote work situations so that more of us can be employed. But there are some significant gaps. In some ways, not only the regulators have failed, but we have failed as advocates in addition to that. I know it may be a little hard to hear, but many of us fail to consider the implications of advocating for consumer-based technologies to be accessible, while forgetting that technologies that work in the background on the administrative side also needed to be accessible. And because of that, I think workplace environments still remain significantly inaccessible to disabled people who are working or who want to work but aren't able to because the technologies are not accessible. There's some hope. We are in a good place when it comes to some of the largest companies, such as Microsoft, Google, Salesforce, who have hired dedicated staff to make their technologies accessible, including the administrative side. But that doesn't mean we're completely out of the trouble zone. Just because bigger technology companies make things accessible, that doesn't mean medium-sized and smaller companies are going to do the same. So we need to address that particular issue, and we need to address it really quickly, either by working directly with companies or with working with the Department of Justice to have rules established, or Department of Labor. Let me just talk to you a few minutes about what's coming.
Pratik, I'm sorry for interjecting. This is
Yes.
Diane speaking, but we have someone who's raised the hand function. I think they may have a concern, and it's Janice. I just want to address and make sure everything's okay. And we're trying to address multiple accessibility nuances in the background. I'm sorry for interrupting.
That's okay.
Janice, Kyle will unmute you.
You should be able to unmute yourself now, Janice. This is Kyle.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I'm fine. I think maybe you meant Micah, maybe? I'm not sure.
Hi, Micah. Yeah, the screen says your mom's name. I'm glad you're with us. Can we help you with something?
Oh, no, I'm fine. I'm not sure. I didn't press anything.
Okay. Well,
No.
it's all right. Thank you. We'll go back to where we were, and we're happy you're here.
Yeah,
I want to make sure I'm being given some feedback that if I'm using the chat, is that blocking people's access to the screen? Because I think it depends on which interface people are using. And we are in fact monitoring the Q&A. Yes, PJ, thank you. And we are monitoring the chat. I'm trying to do both of those with other folks in the background. So if my using the chat is blocking access, obviously that's not going to work. So I need someone to tell me if that's happening. And thank you, Kamisha, for the information. Does anyone have any concerns about access at this juncture? I know somebody wants to, if people open the chat function, it will appear on the side of the screen and won't block the speaker. So I have the chat open now. I hope it's not undermining anyone's access. I will do my very best to keep in response with all of you. And I'm going to back away now because I want to go back to what we were talking about. And I apologize, Pratik.
That's okay.
Thank you, everybody, very, very much.
As your moderator, I would just point out that accessibility glitch speaks to the very things that Pratik, you are talking about.
Yes, exactly. Zoom and these kinds of remote meeting situations are pretty new to a lot of people, and it takes a bit, not only getting used to, but getting everyone to be on the same page. So let me just spend a couple of minutes talking about and end my talk by talking a little bit about where we're going in the future, or where I think we're going in the future, and what we need to pay attention to as we move forward. As I said, the remote work environment situation is accelerating, and even after the pandemic, we are going to be looking at a lot of companies employing individuals on a remote basis, which means some good things for disabled people, but at the same time, if the access is not there, then those opportunities don't exactly work out in our favor. So I think workplace accessibility is a significant part of what we need to look at right now in a very short term. Somewhat long term in the future, say about 5 years or so, we need to take a look at full access to virtual environments as well as what is called augmented reality. Virtual environments will be used for remote work, entertainment, and additional possibilities that we can't even imagine right now. Similarly, augmented reality will be used in a variety of situations. It's already being used in workplace environments in some places. We'll be looking at automated vehicles and accessible transportation over the next 10 years or so. I won't talk too much about it right now, but the last thing I want to say, and something that we all need to look at, is the emerging field of synthetic biology.
Mm-hmm.
Technology, as we look at right now, is what we interact with. But technology going forward will be who we are. It will define who we become in the future. Or the discussion we need to have is who we want to have become, or who it is that we want them to make us. I know that there are lots of controversies and discussions that we need to have about things such as CRISPR, genetic manipulation, to eliminate disabilities versus individual choice of who and what kind of access we need to have or we're going to have. So I think that's a good place to end, and I'll turn it back to you, Stephen.
Well, thank you so much, Pratik. The rapid expansion of technologies into AI and the dynamics of new algorithms that affect public space segue into the whole idea of design justice. You know, if you're a person who is trans and you're trying to go through a metal detector in an airport, you trigger every alarm. And what follows is indescribably awful in terms of the human interactions. So we do have to think with a visionary CRIP design justice view about what the technologies and post-molecular medicine are going to be like. So thank you so much for those remarks. It's wonderful. This might be a nice time to segue to Alice Wong, who works at the intersections between art and culture and media and literature and voting rights and public advocacy. Are you able to join us, Alice?
I'm here, Stephen.
Yay!
I'm here as a did my doctoral self. So hey everyone, my name is Alice Wong. I am an Asian American disabled woman. I have short black hair. I'm wearing a warm, fuzzy, gray fleece jacket. There is a mask over my nose attached to a ventilator. My background is completely dark because I am a creature of the night. I'm proud of it. Here's the atypical chronotypes. So I'm going to just keep my comments very short because I want to get into the questions later on. I'm talking to you all from San Francisco, California. And, I am really pissed off and really tired. This has just been almost 11 months as we're approaching almost a full year of the pandemic in San Francisco, at least, with the first stay-at-home order. It was announced, I believe, mid-March of 2020. And I have not left my home once, except in October for flu shots.
Yeah.
So this has been my life, my existence, and I'm not alone in this. Right? There's been hundreds of thousands of billions of people all over the world who are already sick, disabled, immunocompromised, living at home for many reasons, and still very much active and engaged with the world from their bed, from their couch. In terms of a reckoning, that's the kind of reckoning that I would like to talk about in terms of how this pandemic finally, maybe finally, woke people up and people realize, oh shit, like accessibility, oh, that's a thing. Or, oh my gosh, crib time. What a concept. Disabled people have been paving this for, centuries, this wisdom. And only now, with non-disabled people, have been inconvenienced in their lives, do they realize the privileges that they've had in terms of working, participating, and being safe. Because who gets to be safe? This is the big thing. I think we know right now, with this pandemic, with no end in sight, to be safe is a privilege. And there's a lot of people who are not safe and have never been safe before the pandemic. And I would count disabled people along with other marginalized communities as part of that group. Right now in California, I've been pretty active in terms of vaccine prioritization. So for folks who haven't heard, our governor did his illustrious wisdom, and I say that with a heaping scoop of sarcasm and salty side-eye. Last week, he announced that he's completely deprioritizing a tier of people that includes high-risk people under 65. So they're going to prioritize this current round, which is phase 2. But the third phase, which includes essential workers and high-risk disabled people, chronically ill people, immunocompromised people under 65, will be forced to be part of this larger age-based rollout. So the justification of that is for speed and scale. Now, to me, there's no science or logic behind that. There's a lot of ableism and eugenics behind that.
Yes.
And that's just my opinion on it. And I think the opinion of a lot of people.
Yep.
And this is what happens when we have decision makers, people in power, ultimately that do not reflect all communities. And this is why we need disability rights and disability justice front and center more than ever. And yeah, so right now, the last week, I should be working on other things, but like a lot of other people are just incredibly scared, incredibly angry, and really activated. This has been an all hands on deck effort throughout California with groups such as Disability Rights California and a lot of other community-based groups as other stakeholders. So I started a hashtag called High Risk CA. So this was a way to give space to have people realize, hey, we exist at high risk isn't just based on age. This is, again, part of the problem is the media's framing of who is high risk, who looks like high risk. And as younger disabled people know, a lot of things are not apparent. And disabled people still 30 plus years now, after the ADA, still have to prove themselves, still have to defend their right to exist, defend their humanity, and have to go through inordinate amounts of emotional, intellectual labor just to say, hey, we're here too. Like, this is just beyond like the low bar, right? This is just so ridiculous that this is still needed now. But this just shows how power is still really a huge issue. Who has power? And I'm talking about political power, I'm talking about cultural power, I'm talking about all forms of power. And right now, I have been really heartened to see, the usages of social media and just other means for people without these typical, access to power, access to influence, to where we're using things to mobilize, without waiting around, without waiting for people to pay attention to us. And also, I think this is very much aligned with the people power we've seen last year, and the last several years, with the uprisings across the country against police brutality and white supremacy with Black Lives Matter movements, which I think is really important in terms of another topic that disabled people and disabled leaders and organizers really need to reckon with. For example, this is my last comments. Nearby Syracuse, in the neighboring city of Rochester,
Yep.
2 days ago, a 9-year-old young Black disabled girl was brutalized by police. And this comes into the just after last year, when the police murdered a Black disabled man to the name of Daniel Prude. I'd like to question and pose this question, where are the disability rights organizers, leaders in the New York State area who are organizing, who are being in solidarity with the local community leaders, the Black leaders in Rochester. This is something that everybody should care about. And we should really place Black people, Black disabled people front and center. So that's it for now. I'll turn off my video.
Alice touches on so many important points. One of the things that the disabled know is that the medical model of disability, which comes out of the practice of medicine and which holds that people with disabilities are simply defective normal people, continues to damage those who lead disabled lives. What's the number one thing a doctor will say when someone goes blind? I'm sorry, there's nothing more I can do for you. The disabled person is seen as a medical failure. They are problematized. They are then reduced in the caliber and quality of their citizenship according to a society that thinks of normalcy as the advantage. Then this, of course, balloons across intersections. Disabled children, disabled people who have, neurodiversity dynamics, people with various mental illnesses are not only treated poorly by the police, but the problems multiply astronomically if we're talking about people of color. So what's just happened in Rochester, New York is actually a massive, massive human rights crime. And I take Alice's point about upstate activists and, what are we going to do? I was thinking about this morning. I did not hear this story until this morning, but I think that's a really important question. All right, so Naomi, are you here?
I am.
Yay. You notice I said your name almost as though you're Finnish. Naomi.
Or Mexican.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. We're so pleased that you're here. Thank you so much for taking time to be with us tonight. The microphone is yours on anything you want to discuss.
Great. Just taking in what Alice and Pratik shared to my heart, and just sitting with that, it's like, whew, that's some heavy and real stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah, good evening. My name is Naomi Ortiz. I am a light-skinned mestiza with dark short hair, and I'm wearing silver earrings and a black sweater. And I just want to thank Diane and the Institute for inviting me and these awesome panelists to come together and talk about a reckoning with the ADA. I've been waiting. No. So 30 years after the ADA, oh, I skipped over where I am. Sorry, that's important. I'm joining you from the ancestral lands and the current lands of the A'atam and the tribal lands of the Pascoyaqui in Tucson, Arizona, which is about 50 miles from the US-Mexico border. So 30 years after the ADA, where I live and across the country, disabled folks live daily with the reinforcement that we are the problem. And that our bodies and our minds are to blame for not being included or considered as community members. There's several key questions that I think disability community is confronting at this point in time. The first of these questions is, if we're relying on disabled folks to organize to fight for access and inclusion, how do we confront internalized ableism? The things that we're taught to believe, such as that we don't deserve access because we can't magically provide it ourselves, or that exclusion is a natural outcome of difference.
Yeah.
The disability community, well, at least some folks, often talk about the social model as a framework, a response to disability exclusion. The social model basically says that disability is a natural part of diversity, that the folks who experience disability are the experts, and it's the barriers to access which make us disabled.
Right.
However, while there's truth to the social model, a critique I have, and I think a lot of us have, is that when things become accessible, it's not like my disability goes away or I'm no longer dealing with limitation. For me, when access is real, it allows me to be more fully myself. A disabled mestiza, border living femme, and I don't have to expend all of my energy just getting in the door. I can expend energy contributing my thoughts and participating in what's happening. And access offers this inclusion to a lot of different types of community members. In many workshops I facilitate, I start our time with including disability access needs as part of what people share, along with name and gender pronoun. Most non-disabled people will say something like, well, I'm not disabled, but my kid is sick and I might need to leave for a quick phone call to check in. Or I don't have access needs, but I can't hear very well, and so I might ask you to repeat something. Laying a foundation of access allows people to have needs, whether or not they identify as disabled. It allows us an opportunity to be more fully ourselves and present with each other.
Mhm.
We were on this panel asked to share our favorite definition of ableism. One I like is ableism is a pervasive system of discrimination and exclusion that oppresses people with disabilities. Ableism operates on an individual, cultural, and societal level. Deeply held beliefs about productivity, attractiveness, and the value of human life, combined with a basic fear of vulnerability, result in an environment that is hostile to people with whose ability at accessing cultural and religious rituals. Place may or may not include the roots of our cultural heritage, but we are responsible to the land and to the people of the land. That responsibility includes solidarity building and access. And the last question I think we're grappling with in this time, and something that Alice brought up too, is how does care of self happen when we do such heavy emotional labor for inclusion?
Yeah.
I write a lot about self-care, and I write about self-care as a disabled mestiza. So many of the stories are from my perspective, being grounded in the realities of ableism and racism. But I also interviewed over 35 other types of social justice activists doing really different kinds of work over the US and Mexico and Nicaragua for the book Sustaining Spirit. There were many threads that brought us together, many which are sourced from a place of deep wounding due to exclusion. Another thread was a collective response to needing to negotiate our value to the community we lived in. I've written about, but continue to be so curious how people deal with the lack of resolution and sustain this kind of work for the long haul. I'm interested in looking inside the cracks of the foundation that we've built structures of movement work on. Cracks that go so deep and are so profound that they offer nothing but contradictions. For example, how do we as disabled people negotiate needing resources in order to stay alive, and yet believe and act on environmental justice? How do we honor and make sense of the emotional labor that's necessary to do accountability work? These are the questions I'm looking at within my art and writing, and I believe exploring these questions within disability community and our cultural communities can help us develop strategies and deepen into our own understandings, all of which support us in our efforts towards mutual liberation. Thank you.
Wow, that's great. That's great. The intersections between disability, place, history of place, spirit of place, spirit of body, more than acceptance of the body, but really a celebration of embodiment, rooted deeply in history and storytelling. Those things are so important for everyone, and critically important, I think, for people in the disability community. Storytelling matters so much, and also a recognition that disablement and the built environment and the toxic environment created by capitalism are so profoundly connected. I'll tell you a quick story of a friend of Diane's and mine. He's a young writer named Taylor Brorby. He's from South Dakota. He's queer. He went to protest, the pipeline, and was, arrested by police, and they took away his diabetes medicine, and he almost died in jail. And he's writing now about the intersection between queerness, fighting for the land, and disablement. seeing those intersections. And that to me is incredibly important and vital work. Thank you also for bringing nuance to ableism, because the fear felt by those who are not, at least now, disabled is such a big, profound collective muscle, and it does negatively influence almost every conversation that the disabled need to have, because we are figures of fear, and so we do the emotional labor of trying to diffuse that, which is important work. But we need group help, not self-help, right? So that's just a wonderful presentation. Thank you so much. I'm gushing.
Stephen, may I interject briefly? This is Diane.
Please.
Vocally, I'll put my camera on just for a second. Hi, everyone. We have a number of things in the background happening involving different ways that people are accessing the space. And
Yes.
so we've adjusted the chat function. We have many, many, many wonderful comments and feedback and accolades and joy and love being expressed. There are about 212 people here, I believe now. And so I just wanted to say, if you're having any concerns and you weren't able to communicate directly with Rachel or Kyle because of the settings, which I apparently have to update yet again with Kyle and Rachel's help, you're welcome to send a message to Kyle and all panelists, or to Rachel and all panelists, or to me and all panelists. But we've shifted the chat so that every single participant isn't going to get every single message, because some people are experiencing some different ways of doing that. So we're doing our best here at Kusisto, Zubel, Ruggieri, and Wiener Incorporated. And thank you all very much for your patience and for your eloquence and beautiful things everyone's sharing together. Back to you, Steve.
Well, our next panelist is a remarkable disability rights, warrior, DJ David James Savarese. He left out of his bio that he is also a Peabody Award winner for the film in which he is the primary documentarian star. Deej did in fact win a Peabody Award a year and a half ago. He's also a fellow of the Soros Foundation and has been doing pioneering work on behalf of those who speak with alternative communication approaches. So he's also a wonderful poet, and I'm so thrilled to welcome him to our Zoom stage.
Hi, everyone. My name is David James Savarese. I am a white man in my 20s, with glasses, a goatee, and short, reddish-brown hair, wearing a black turtleneck. As a former foster child, I know what it's like to fight hard not to be thrown away and forgotten. As a practicing optimist, I believe not only that nobody is disposable, but that everybody is indispensable. We are all essential and meaningful participants of something larger than ourselves. I'm honored to meet you all and gather here today to talk about where we are 30 years after the passage of the ADA and where, with a new administration in the White House, we might be headed. As an alternatively communicating person who was fully engaged in regular education from kindergarten through college graduation and who's now gainfully self-employed, I have clearly benefited from the ADA and from my achievements as a highly educated person. But for me, adding to the ADA is not just about changing or improving the law. It's also about changing the lens people see us through. It's about unearthing the societal assumptions that still stand in our way. It's about moving us beyond a world of inclusion and exclusion and towards a celebration of all forms of bio and neurodiversity. And it's about trying to actually unlearn some of what I've been taught. As an artful activist, I'm a poet and lyric essayist who favors metaphor, which opens us up to new ways of thinking and finding connections between seemingly disparate things. Most recently, I've come to liken ableism to the cultivated garden of a speech-based society. What does that mean? It means that flowers with so-called true roots are shown off and a pretense of individualism and self-reliance are prized. It means that the garden wall is made up of communication barriers and, I would add, the physical body barriers associated with them. Law, policy, and many assistive technologies assume the disabled are outsiders, striving to inhabit the cultivated garden. They seek to offer us passage across the divide by dismantling the physical barriers and by helping us pass or pose as independent, able-bodied speakers. But once there, we are seen as exceptional and accepting of the status quo, further fortifying the very garden wall we hope to dismantle. Most recently at an NEH-funded talk in the Art of Flourishing series, I encouraged all people to undermine what keeps us dutifully stuck in this inclusion-exclusion coupling, in which some beings are seen as disposable and others not, by seeing ourselves as one of many lives in progress, as a field of diverse and interconnected rhizomes, what some might call weeds. We can't change who we are, but we can change the hopeful ways we relate to each other. What if instead of making our way into the garden, we invite everyone out into the field to rise and thrive? What might that look like, and how might doing so begin to render those walls irrelevant, obsolete? I'd like to explore that question more fully today. Let me see if I can explain what I mean by rising and thriving. Those who are less attuned to the wisdom of plants might call it creatively improvising. Unlike true roots, rhizomes persevere by creating a network of interdependent root bulbs. If cut down, they grow back. If necessary, they can lie dormant for up to a year before blossoming again. I've introduced rising into every aspect of my life to maximize my flexibility as I creatively improvise in my daily life and activism. Certainly, it helps that Biden's administration has prioritized communication accessibility from day one, adding ASL interpreters to every daily press briefing, reinstating the Spanish website, and foregrounding stutterers as leaders worthy of being heard. When we see a text-to-speech software user up at that podium, we'll know we've arrived. During my outreach campaign for my documentary film Teach, Inclusion Shouldn't Be a Lottery, I discovered that this seeming barrier could also function as fertile soil for intersectional connections to form. As I screened the film and lead discussions at private and public high schools, colleges, and universities across the country, I found time and time again that my experience with the underestimation of the stranger's gawking gaze was something that resonated with an international student from China attending Drake University in Iowa, with a black female undergrad at Macalester in Minnesota, with upward bound students at a private day school outside Boston, and with foster children in North Carolina, to cite just a few. They too felt underestimated and unheard strictly because their speech and bodies differed from the norm of the particular community they were inhabiting. As their local communities heard them speak out publicly, often for the first time, light bulbs went off for their classmates, teachers, professors, and administrators who began to see these barriers within their own communities and began imagining how to disrupt them. These kinds of momentary, intersectional entanglements offer the kind of diversity necessary to bring about the transformative change our country, our world, our ecosystem requires. It's my hope that intersectionality becomes a new way of encouraging more rhizomatic connections. If intersectionality gives us static and fixed identities that are more and more particular, then it renders us more and more cut off from each other. But if we envision these aspects of ourselves as more and more threads that offer us potential connections with others, and we add to our intersectional understanding of ourselves additional aspects of ourselves, such as poet, teacher, ecologist, then we open ourselves to more and more possibilities. In case I sound like I think I'm enlightened beyond the rest of you, allow to share my own communication biases. What academics call textocentrism. I was 4/5 of the way through my honors thesis in anthropology before I suddenly became mindful of my own bias. A high achiever in mainstream education from kindergarten through college, I communicated almost entirely in written English. What, I wondered, might I have lost in the process, and how might I make others open to my ideas? First, I began to seek out the works of those autistics, some non-speaking, others not, who choose non-alphabetic forms of expression. In my first ekphrastic chapbook entitled A Doorknob for the Eye, I turned my attention to the artwork of 7 autistic artists and sought to converse with them in poetry, what I have often referred to as my native tongue. I chose a poetic, rather than prosaic, form of telling to honor the sensorial, to stretch the multifunctionality of language, and to elevate, and not obliterate, their language of choice. In my current ekphrastic project, 3 other poets and I focus on the artwork of one artist, Malcolm Corley. In a poem entitled Wood Nymph, I begin to acknowledge some assumptions I'm unlearning. I am going to read the poem, but first we'll pause for Kyle to share the image and the description of it.
Hi, everybody. This is Kyle. I'm going to go ahead and put that image on screen now. All right. It should be visible on your screens now for those who can see it. And it is a painting of a feminine-looking face with green long hair and a blue and green background. Go ahead, DJ.
Wood Nymph by DJ Savarese. Her eyes and mouth are leaves. If she could talk, she'd melt, I think, or at least evaporate. When the tree dies, so does the hamadryad, in this case, Agieros, denizen of the black poplar. To say that she is bonded to her tree is to believe too much in the spirit of distinction. She is the tree, that triangular, tooth-leafed cottonwood. When Erysichthon cut down Demeter's grove, Lemos bore like a beetle into his stomach, becoming the need to eat. And eat Erysichthon did until he ate himself. No chainsaw is ever happy. Like the wood nymph, I live inside the grain of speech, the wood of warning. He who harms my sister shall die of insatiable hunger.
I love Mal's painting and clearly fell in love with the wood nymph. I'm sure you have too, if not in your mind, in your heart. Why? I might answer because she's who I want to be, and she's almost not able to be distinguished from her environment. And maybe we aren't either. Can I ask why? I think it's because we are in, and of, our environment. It matters because we aren't whole without each other. I love that idea, that we're not able without one another. And without one another, we're connected but not as we should be. I mention this not because I've lost my focus, but because I'm freshly able to open myself beyond the mirage of my own skin, beyond the misperceptions and misconception of my body's boundary. What I love most about the disability rights movement is that it asks us to abolish all forms of discrimination toward all people, not just toward the disabled. These days I've unearthed my own human-centric bias, realizing discrimination expands beyond the human and understanding that we are all interdependent parts of the same ecosystem. As I end my opening remarks, I imagine you might be asking, but what can we do to dismantle that garden wall right now, starting today? I encourage each of us to see ourselves as a part of something greater than ourselves. Lead with an open heart and mind. Offer more philanthropic and entrepreneurial support to people who self-identify as disabled. Support and meaningfully engage with organizations like the Alliance for Citizen-Directed Support and Communication First. Ask who is being denied entry into the classrooms and schools you or your children or grandchildren attend, and insist they be allowed in. Refuse to do things that exclude others. Pass legislation that outlaws segregated settings for all people, and pass legislation that guarantees everyone a means to communicate. Be brave enough to examine the misassumptions you hold that stand in others' ways. Give up scarcity thinking. We all deserve our lives to be meditations on hope. Thank you.
That is wonderful, and so much important, imaginative, and directed political thinking there. DJ is more than an optimist. One might say that he is, a eco-futurist, anti-ableist visionary. I'm going to say last but not least, we have Lederick Horn, who is going to bring our parade to an end before we open things up for questions.
All right, thank you so much. Yes, I'm Lederick Horn. I am a clean-shaven African-American man who at this date is 43 years old. I'm wearing a black jacket, white shirt, black tie. And as part of the description, and I think also just as part of me digesting everything that came before my opportunity to speak, I think it's also worthy of me noting that I'm sitting in the corner of my study with a blue wall on one side, a white wall on the other, and artwork that my fiance and I have collected over the years. And the study is in a house that I've owned since, I guess, 2007, a home that was built actually by my grandfather and my uncle, a home that I bought from a cousin on the same block that I grew up in. And this neighborhood is firmly rooted in a Black community, one that was designated so and designed to be one due to the practices of redlining. My grandfather, who was born a farmer in southern Georgia, tells a story about coming up here and wanting to buy land and wanting to start a construction company. And if you were Black, you were sent to one realtor, and if you were white, you were sent to another. And my grandfather is what we used to call a race man. He was a race man. He was president of the NAACP, and I grew up in a household full of storytelling about the heights of the civil rights movement. He marched on Washington, and I think so much of his fight and his existence really informed me and the work that I do today. This home is also less than a half a mile away from my elementary school. It's the first place that I ended up being placed in a special ed classroom because I am a person with a learning disability. And, I drive by that school many, many days, and there's still a sort of shock of pain that I still experience when I reflect back on the mix of both joy and then the absolute segregation that I experienced. And I'm fortunate in that I am one of a handful of folks who are from this community who went through special education, folks with disabilities who was able to go on to college, get a degree, and through an amazing academic support program, really learn the value of connecting with a community of people with disabilities. Disability was nothing that was spoken openly about, both in my household or throughout all of my times in special education. But once I got to that college program, I realized the value that that community had. And it's also the first time I really got introduced to what the ADA was, you know, and I'm born in 77, you know, and I got to ride so many of the legislative victories of the disability rights movement. And, you know, I graduated from high school just in time for the ADA to be able to really firmly protect me as a person with a disability as I went through college and then started my life, you know, in the world of work. And I have worked very hard to address issues for folks with disabilities, and particularly young people with disabilities in our school systems. And I've also, I think, you know, worked hard to also root myself in bringing forth a lot of the conversation and dialogue around people with hidden disabilities, and how we are intersect, represented, or sometimes not represented within this overall movement. You know, I don't want to take up too much time because I really do want to kind of get into the dialogue with everyone. But I was in listening to everyone speak, I was just reflecting back on this year and all the different challenges that I experienced. And one of the more sort of frustrating things that happened to me was being one of a handful of Black people with disabilities who gets to be invited to the front of the room at conferences and different events. When Black Lives Matter really happened, and you know, to the extent where people really started paying attention to the cries of the Black community, my phone started ringing, you know, and I got asked to talk with leaders at several different disability organizations, and particularly organizations that look to serve people with learning disabilities and ADHD. And many folks were interested in doing webinars or, you know, having conversations about things like disproportionality and, you know, and also just the disproportionate effect that COVID had on the Black community. And I, of course, you know, am interested in engaging in those dialogues. I think they're very valuable. But I also said to all of those leaders that I think that there is something very distinct about this moment in history that requires us to engage in conversations and to do work that should be very different than what we were doing prior to COVID and prior to George Floyd's murder. That what I really encouraged all of those leaders to do, and I'm saying this very directly to all those folks who are listening into this conversation, is that as part of this conversation about intersectionality, I know that the fight for diversity, equity, inclusion should be at the forefront of how we do this work, right? And so I have, you know, throughout this year said to folks, you know, instead of like us pointing the finger at school districts and things along those lines, we should be looking at, you know, who are the folks that we're hiring within our organizations, right? Are we providing a seat for Black people to be able to voice their concerns and to have a meaningful leadership role within the organizations that serve people with disabilities? And almost uniformly, most of these organizations are like, nah, we don't really have too many Black folks on staff. And of course, I know that because that's why they call in this skinny brother from New Jersey to ask what I think, right? You know, like they should really be just turning to the person next to them or, you know, a colleague within their office or their organization and engaging in a dialogue, which should have been happening for years. And so I want to close out with a poem, but one of the more sort of frustrating experiences that I've had over the course of this year with all the different issues that are going on is just, I think that so many people of color, but Black people in particular, are just sort of like, this is work that we should have been doing years ago. And yeah, like, where is the Black representation? Where is the Black leadership within our movement? What can we do to make sure that, all people of color, but particularly Black people, are able to have a voice and play a leadership role in, how these organizations work and function.
Yep.
Last year, I wrote a poem in recognition of our 30th anniversary of the ADA, and it's during 2020, and all the other sort of issues related to 2020 found its way within the piece. And I agree with everyone who spoke before that we still have tremendous amount of work to do, but I also wanted to take this as an opportunity to just sort of acknowledge a lot of the work that has been done and the people who've made that work happen, as well as take an opportunity to celebrate the beauty of our community as people with disabilities. So I'm gonna try to recite this and see how it goes.
All right.
I also was like, as the as LD person, I was like, I'm not gonna read nothing up here. We're just gonna just talk. And so this poem is called Until Every Barrier Falls. This is for the ones who would not be trapped behind exclusion's shameful walls. And this is for the ones who will continue to push until every barrier falls. This is for every wounded warrior who came home and challenged our grateful nation to elevate its expectations. This is for the ones who blocked the buses, sat in the sit-ins, and crawled to the Capitol. This is for the protesters, the marchers, those adapt angels with wheelchair wings who troubled the waters of their time so that this generation might live in a more inclusive now. As I write this, all over America, monuments are falling, and only questions stand atop each empty pedestal. As I recite this, I hope an artist is listening and will respond with marble and bronze. But until then, Ed Roberts, Judy Heumann, this poem is for you. Let each line chase the light in your smiles and trace the contours of your commitment. Let these words salute those dedicated to the ideals that equality sprouts from the branch of equity. Independence is the flower that grows from access, and freedom is rooted in the soil of advocacy. This is for the ones who have embraced the reality that humanity is both fragile and mighty. And when we ask for help, it is not a sign of weakness, but instead is an indication of our determination. However you navigate, it is legit. This is for those who read with their eyes, ears, and fingertips. This is for the minds that dance in details, and for the wide-eyed ones who remake the world with every thought they think. We are the river of innovation from which the whole world drinks. And who am I? I am a lover of words, left heartbroken by every spelling test. In school, my desk was in a classroom at the end of the hall, so this poem is for me too. Within me is the meeting of two movements. I am Black and blue. My disability is hidden, and I am the descendant of those who could not hide. I am your neighbor, your countryman, one of the poets our nation has produced. And here is what I know to be true. This world is not enough. And if this here is what we call normal, I say, let's be different. Let us, on this day, celebrate every shape, every color, every way. Let our actions commemorate the array of our being. Build a future in service of the multitude, and let this century be the wilderness from which our better selves are born. Thank you.
Wow. That's just fabulous. Thank you. Thank you so much, LaDerek. I just want to point out that as a blind kid who was sent to public school long before the ADA, and for whom learning to read was incredibly difficult, and who had to really navigate through all of the obstacles, the people who didn't believe in me, the cruelties of other students, the lack of awareness, the struggle to gain language has been a really deep and abiding experience in my life, and I suspect in the lives of all disabled people. And then to alchemize that and transform that journey into something really genuinely uplifting, beautiful, expansive. It was Auden said, the roses really want to grow. And I think that there's a way in which you and Naomi and DJ have all brought up that deep ecology of the imagination as a sustaining vision. Wow, thank you. That's just absolutely wonderful. I think, on the subject of ableism, I would add one little thing perhaps, which is that colleges and universities are places where those of us with disabilities have an opportunity to learn about poetry and language or science or mathematics, engineering, entrepreneurship, whatever it is our hearts may desire. It still, however, remains the case that ableism thrives in the academy. And one of the reasons for that, as outlined in Jay Dolmage's wonderful book on academic ableism, is that higher education admits the disabled into its university ivory towers really on sufferance. That is to say, we're letting you in, but we're not so sure you really belong here. And moreover, we're not going to do much to help you. And if you do need help, we've got an office over here hidden in a dormitory somewhere that most people won't be able to find. And that's where you go for your accessible books or your note taking or whatever it is you might need. We won't challenge our academic departments to build those accommodations into how they do business. We won't instruct our faculty into the dynamic possibilities of the disabled as important academic participants and citizens. Nor will we envision new ways of teaching and new ways of imagining pedagogy so that we're simply not replicating 19th century rote learning. We don't want to do those things. They're complicated. They ask us to think too hard about who we are and what we do. Ableism is not just fear, it's also systemic. And this is where it intersects with systemic racism and the other systematized bigotries that still haunt the academy. I just feel the need to mention that because as a disability rights advocate, activist, I read of almost monthly about lawsuits that disabled students have to file against colleges and universities because they won't provide the most basic accommodations. And that is still, unfortunately, legion. Syracuse University was one of the first universities, if not the first, to have a disability studies program. And we are committed to disability, and we're making great strides here on our Orange Hill. But we, I think, can all admit, those of us who work here, that there is still so much work to do, both here and and across society. I think if more people were educated in college to the full dynamics and possibilities of disability, then some of the obstacles we all face as activists would certainly be diminished. So I'm going to stop talking, and I'm going to open things up for questions. I note that we have really about 18 minutes, which means we'll get to some questions, but not others. But we'll, as Diane has pointed out, endeavor to answer those that we can't get to via the good old-fashioned interwebs.
Thank you, everyone, so much. I'm going to share some energetic virtual applause in multiple formats from here. I'm about 20 miles outside of Binghamton in a very chilly old house with two cats who have decided to run around at exactly the moment I had to turn my camera on, because you know how kitty cats are. So I wanted to clarify a couple of things. First of all, I want to thank everybody again for being here. And Kyle and Rachel and I are going to grab all of the different links that have been shared in the chat, all the resources that have been shared, the different links associated with questions that were asked and then responded to. We're going to put them all together into an accessible format, of course. And when we give you the link to the video and give you information about how you might reach out to get books from the bookstore, we'll also provide you with all those different links. We have almost 50 questions, maybe more like 75, actually, I think. So I'm going to go through some of these, and the ones that we don't get to, we'll do our very best to follow up with you individually. But I know that early on, there was a question raised specifically where somebody was asking Steve if he could comment on aesthetics in relation to disability culture. So I'm going to see if I can find that question back here. And the person asked, well, I'll go back to that one. I'll ask one I know that I have in front of me. Somebody asked during the Q&A, can you ask panelists to comment on the massive deaths of people trapped in nursing homes? So that's a very different question than the one I referenced, but I'll find the other one and go back to it.
Well,
So
Diane, we're not going to be able to get to all of these because
no, of course not.
we're going to have to stop at 9:30. So let's recommit to answering questions, you know, either collectively or individually. But let's try to get to a couple before we have to cut off.
So let's start with that one. People are asking.
Nursing homes.
Yes, let's take that one.
Can I jump in real quick? This
Please.
is Alice. I'll just be very brief and say that I think that, you know, incarceration is incarceration. So, you know, I think any work towards prison abolition, there's so many important connections with, you know, increasing home and community-based services and to really thinking about how torturous settings are places where they're not safe, where people are trapped, where people are made invisible and not human, which is why we've seen, I think the last statistics, 40% of all deaths due to COVID are happening in congregate settings. And that means nursing homes, but all kinds of institutions. And this is why abolition of prisons, psychiatric hospitals, you know, all of these things are disability issues, but they're very clearly also racial justice issues. So that would just be my little comments. There is a website called Abolition and Disability Coalition that I would drop in the chat, but yeah, that's about it for now.
Yeah.
If I can add to that,
Please.
so just before the start of 2020, I had just a few blocks away, my father and my grandmother were in a home and I had a staff of 5 people coming in and out to provide medical support for them. Really home health aides and things that just gotten to the point where it was like they needed to move into a nursing facility. And I think, you know, part of this speaks to like how we deliver healthcare in our country, and the ways in which we're able to really honor all people by how that care is given. And then I think it also speaks to the need for like an improvement in architecture, you know, like another house my granddaddy built, but my granddad clearly didn't think anybody was gonna have a disability because he put in way too many steps, right? And way too many barriers. And so, you know, it made it just way too difficult to be able to provide support for folks at home. And I think it's a way in which we honor, you know, the way in which disability happens as part of just a natural part of being a human being, is all of us thinking about when we're building houses, when we're constructing, you know, the spaces around us, you know, like that we do it in a way which is truly inclusive for everyone.
Okay, I'm going to go back to that other question. So I'm actually going to take the liberty of addressing this to everyone and not just to you, Steve. And the question is from Anthony, who's interested to hear with regard to the ADA at 30 about the dynamics between beauty and insistence.
Well, I'm going to tell a little story very quickly. When I published my memoir, Planet of the Blind, I was at a reception for donors to Guiding Eyes for the Blind, which is where I worked at the time, one of the nation's premier guide dog training schools. And a rather wealthy white, golf club guy walked up to me and he said, "I read your book." And I said, "Oh, what did you think?" And he said, "A lot of verbal pyrotechnics in that book." And it was an interesting moment because it allowed me to say to him, well, you know, one of the things that the abled tend to think is that the blind don't know anything. And so there are, in fact, a lot of fairly nuanced and sophisticated words in the book. They reflect my lifetime of reading. Then I also said, my goal, such as one has one, was to try to explore the beauty and strange wonder of blindness as it's lived on the inside, and not as people who are not disabled imagine it to be. And so, you know, I mean, I think that that's a central aesthetic thing that most of us in the disability community who write or paint or draw or dance or make music, we're about showing what a, weird and wonderful phenomenological difference we have, and to make that manifest for people.
And I'd like to add to that, Stephen, the idea that disabled people don't have a consistent, or at least an idea of aesthetics that is consistent, at least internally consistent to themselves, is something that we need to convey, that they have, especially with regards to blind people and aesthetics.
Yep.
Often, we get painted as someone who don't, or some people who don't really understand the beauty of the world,
right?
Regardless of whether we're a part of a spectrum of people who may have seen something in our lives and have an idea or not. Even somebody who has been blind, who may have been blind from birth, has an aesthetic perspective, regardless of whether they've seen it. And whether they've gotten that from their training, their teaching, their book reading, it's there. And I think we need the opportunity to convey that.
Yeah, we do. And that's, a prime directive, I think, in the lives of disabled artists. We're not just saying our lives matter, though that's important. We're saying and we know some really remarkable things about what it is to be richly alive.
Since Steve, if I could add, I think there's also that people with disabilities have a right to beauty.
Yeah, amen.
A right to beauty.
Yeah.
The things that jump out to me is, one of my mentors, Dr. William Henderson, and going for a walk with him. He's a person with a visual impairment, and he hit me to, like, one way to think about disability is that, or one way that people oftentimes don't think about disability is that people with glasses, right, kind of exist within that visual impairment continuum, but we don't think about glasses as being a piece of technology that we use to, right? And what is beautiful about glasses is that there's been so much care put into making them not only functional but beautiful. So when we think about all the other supports that people with disabilities utilize, right, like, really, where does the art come into those? Like, I remember maybe several years ago, Tommy Hilfiger was working on having really well-designed leg braces, right, that really kind of spoke to beauty and design. And then your earlier comment about those accessible offices on college campuses that get parked in the basement. For maybe 13 years, I've worked with the Nevada Department of Education and visited and worked on a part of initiative for a leadership summit for kids with disabilities in that state. And I got to see the office be in the basement and then move to almost a temple for student supports, where disability supports was built into this beautifully architecturally designed building, where veteran affairs, math tutoring, mental health support was all in one really well-designed integrated building. And I think we all have that right to have spaces and supports that are presented to us in a way which are beautiful.
Yeah. And not only that, it's good social space. Another question, Diane, or other panelists want to weigh in?
I have several questions here, and I'm going to pick one here. So this is from Miso, directed to Naomi and anyone else. Feel free to chime in. Miso said, I'd love to hear your thoughts on how to bring the concept and practices of mutual liberation, disability justice, etc., into K through 12 educational spaces.
This is Naomi. I can start with that. That's a deep question. We got like 3 minutes. I'll just give you an answer that I can. So in working with young people for many, many years around building disability identity and power to have a say in systems, one of the biggest things was really constantly naming what we were doing as building disability solidarity, disability power, a voice for disabled folks, and also reaffirming we're doing this because we care about each other's needs, and this is how we make change in the world that we need to make. Like basically, like whatever I would try to model and then we would try to do in terms of a discussion or in terms of problem solving, creating action steps, those kinds of things. It was a constant reaffirmation and naming that what we're doing is participating in disability cultural values. Like these are values to our community that matter because this is how we make change in the world, and this is how we get to be part of this world that we love. So it's a very quick answer, but yeah, I'd love to chat more about that some other time.
And we'd love to have you chat with us about that some more. Guaranteed.
Does anyone else want to respond to that? We have a moment here.
Well, I'll say this, that in Finland, elementary school kids work in groups of 4, and each group of 4 has a teacher. And so then the teachers move around from group to group. The system is designed so that the teachers get to know each student individually, which means their learning style, what their interests are, as they used to say back in the 60s, what turns them on. And then they really model and design pedagogy to work with that student. How do you get that? Well, you pay your teachers equivalent to, other professionals, and you invest in public education, not as a matter of sufferance, a word I've used more than once tonight, but as a matter of building a strong and vital society. The United States still can't figure this stuff out. And we try to do everything on the cheap, though we'll claim that we spend more than all these other countries on public education. We do it really poorly. And I'll just leave it there.
Okay, so I'm going to combine two questions here. So
This has to be
Lindsay,
the last one.
yes, indeed. I work for a corporate medical device company in upstate New York, says Lindsay. Our leadership is very interested in making the site more accessible. Currently, it is not. What are the first steps we should be taking? And in a related note, there is a comment that someone made about how organizations in the context of COVID are making all kinds of changes and rapidly supporting better access and accommodations, working from home and video conferencing. And this is proving what disability advocates have been knowing all along. When we intentionally choose to be inclusive, access barriers may shift. And that's from Darren. So any comments or thoughts about any of that? Thank you very much.
Well, we have 1 minute, Diane, so I don't think we can get to how to make your website accessible. I'd recommend a number of websites, and I can provide that information after the fact, and will do so. COVID is proving the vulnerability, the precarity, and the fragility of disability in the larger, mechanism of our society. And yet it's also proving what so many of us in the disability community have been saying all along, which is that providing accommodations, creating different ways of approaching the workplace, imagining new ways to get things done, that these are all things, of course, that disability has fostered and pioneered. So, you can split this one right down the middle. The disabled are suffering in extraordinary ways, particularly people of color who are disabled. And on the other hand, many people are learning how to model effective alternative ways of doing work based on things that have in fact been pioneered by those of us who are disabled.
If I can just chime in really quickly, I believe
Yes.
DJ has something to say. If you want to give the floor to DJ quickly.
Yeah.
Can I say something about the K through 12 question? It's most possible in K through 12. Attention to science curriculum will do so much. Plants have lots to teach us about mutual and interdependent relationships.
Yeah, no, I think a natural model of systemic engagement and growth is really wonderful. I agree. Well, again, I want to thank all of you for taking time to join us and to give us the opportunity to have a nuanced and dynamic conversation about the ADA at 30, where we are and where we have to go. There's just so much crackling intelligence in this group. It's just been wonderful to be a modest part of it. And again, thank you to the people here who have endeavored to make this possible. And as Diane has said, we will respond to questions and queries via email or Twitter or whatever mechanism people have outlined. Diane, any last quick thoughts?
Yes, I just want to say, I wish we could have gone to a little more of the questions, but we knew that might happen. And we had many, many, many people here. And any link that was shared in the chat, as I mentioned, will be given to you as a participant. And there are many people commenting and thanking us, various representatives from the university, senior leadership, Steve Bennett, David Seaman, our dean from the libraries, many accolades coming from across the country and globally. So just a very many warm thanks and gratitude being expressed to all of you. And thanks everyone for coming. And thank you to our panelists and to you, Stephen, and to our interpreters and our live captioner, and to Rachel and Kyle for everybody's involvement in making this a successful opportunity for all of us. Have a wonderful night.
All right. Good night, all.
Good night.